And so you said that you did not think that many drugs should be legalized, right? And you think that they're overall...
I think none of the drugs should be legalized, not even marijuana.
Don't you think that legalizing would get it off of the streets and lower crime rates, and perhaps give people who are seeking out drugs, instead of looking for marijuana or cocaine that might be laced, getting it straight from dispensaries is a way to perhaps help them? And also legalizing it has been shown, especially in places like Oregon, California, and New York, that once it's legalized, people don't go to street dealers as much, and they seek out dispensaries, which is obviously a better option. And in order to get it from those places, you need a medical card.
Right.
So do you think that in that case, legalizing could help with this crisis?
Yes, I do believe it. If there is no other option, then legalize is the only option, right? Because I'm totally against drugs, no matter it's legalized or it's on street. But if it is working better way, then yes, legalize is the option.
Right. And the reason I became interested in this topic is we look at the death rates in America. It's one of the I think it is the highest of any place in the world for drug overdoses. And you have places like Portugal, which are every drug is legal in Portugal. And in 2017, they only had 51 deaths compared to America's over 70,000. So I'll give my opinion for this, even though I didn't plan on it. I think that legalizing is actually one of the best ways to try to counter the war on drugs. And I mean, obviously, your opinion is completely valid.
No, it's a different opinion. I'm just completely against any kind of drug.
Right, and that's completely understandable, because it's drugs, I mean, they ruin a lot of people's lives. Yeah.
That's why it's a different opinion. But if we have no choice, then yes, legalizing makes sense.
All right, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, man.
I enjoyed it, man.
Thank you very much. Thanks
so much, man.
Thank you.
Have a great day, right?
Yeah, it's a good project, man.
Thank you. And obviously marijuana has its medicinal purposes as well.
If we're just talking
recreational, I personally believe that marijuana should be regulated the same way alcohol is, because in today's culture it's almost synonymous, and people use it and people get by. Meanwhile, crack and cocaine and heroin and stuff like that is so addictive and so damaging to people that it's like, if it were to be legalized, it would just be mayhem.
So the legality of pharmaceutical companies, right? It's all legal distribution. Controlled distribution and legal distribution, right? But it's hard to phrase, but and you say that these drugs are useful, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that can be opinionated, and say someone who maybe doesn't have diagnosed anxiety or is very stressed out, and they say they want to go buy some marijuana and they find that useful to them, do you think that the legality of those substances should determine whether or not they're using those drugs in the correct ways?
Absolutely. So the one thing you would do is, if you want to find the answer, you follow the money, right? So wherever the money is, that's what the problem is. The problem with the government is they know what they're doing. They know how to make their money. Yeah. So in my humble opinion is they've shied away from a lot of things, even something like magic mushrooms, right? Now we're finding out the psilocybin in that is good for PTSD. It's good for altering, possibly could be. What I was getting to is the issue is they're not willing to do these studies, right? The use of psilocybin has been hindered because they're not willing to do long-term studies on people to find out what the medicinal effect might be. I would say,
and I can give some perspective on that.
Yeah.
So when you have prescription medications, right? Those medicines have been studied, their side effects. So nothing that you take, even water, right? The dose decides the poison. Nothing that you take is without side effects. Now, whether those side effects are acceptable to you or not, or felt by you or not, is your decision to make, but we say that you have to make an informed decision. People don't realize that marijuana isn't benign. It actually increases your cardiovascular risk. It makes so if you have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and have had 4 heart attacks and are using marijuana to help treat your anxiety, you're potentially doing yourself a disservice. But when you have a street drug that's not used prescribed in a medicinal way, have a conversation with a provider who says, these are the side effects. I don't think this particular drug is the one that we should choose for your particular situation. Now you're taking your health into your own hands. You're dosing by yourself. Nobody should be treating themselves, right? Even physicians aren't allowed to treat themselves because you don't have the perspective to do that effectively, right? So when you take that into your own hands, you're essentially experimenting. When you get a drug on the street, there's no way to verify what it is until you try it. When the FDA spends a ton of time and pharmaceutical companies have to jump through billions of dollars worth of hoops to show that their drug is what it is and that it's at least this kind of efficacious and this is its safety profile, right? Now, when you look at it, right, the NRA has made it illegal to study, firearms interventions. So if you choose, I don't know if there are any analogous lobbies against, scheduled narcotic studies, right? There actually have been some psilocybin studies, which I think are more equivocal than, oh my God, this is magic, right? You have some people who think, oh my God, this is magic, but that's anecdotal evidence, right? So you need bigger studies. And I think some of the bigger studies have been more equivocal, like, we don't have a solid answer that this will unlock your mind and make you perfect, right? So if you want to experiment on the side, with mushrooms in particular, you better know your mushroom and know that you're not picking something that'll cause you acute liver failure and kill you. You got to know your dose. Many drugs, especially in people who have a mental health history, drugs can send them into an acute psychosis, so make them mentally ill because of the stimulant effect of some drugs. So when you're taking stuff that we don't have a good safety profile on, that you don't know the concentration from dealer A versus B, right, then you're kind of gambling. And that's what the FDA and pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of time and money on. When you take this pill, it's always this concentration. There are no poisonous components, in a concentration that we consider poisonous, and there isn't an overdose to kill an elephant degree of fentanyl in this drug, right? So I do think that the government spends a lot of time regulating the drug industry. I think it's very hard to bring new drugs to market. The barriers are quite high, and that in part drives drug pricing, I will say. But going back, I don't think drugs are bad, but you need to understand, a street user needs to understand that they're taking their health into their own hands in a way that using approved pharmaceuticals and working with a doctor is at least an attempt at control.
Right. And just the last thing before I let you go. I'm going to talk about, are you familiar with the drug laws and restrictions in Portugal?
No.
So almost everything is legal in Portugal.
Okay.
You can do heroin in a park, and you won't be prosecuted. And if I was looking this morning at statistics of drug overdoses and deaths in the US compared to Portugal, and obviously there's a difference in size of populations, but 51 people died in Portugal to drug overdoses in 2017, and over 70,000 people died to drug overdoses in the United States.
Is that per capita?
No, that's why I said the discrepancy in the population. I believe Portugal's population is about 8 million, but I'm not 100% sure.
So that's less than 10%.
Less than 10%, but even if you scale it up, it's nowhere close. So do you think that, also this fall we saw less regulations coming out in places like Oregon, making a bunch of drugs legal, right? Do you think that that will help in the drug epidemic and the war on drugs, or do you think that if restrictions were to loosen, it would make things worse?
you know, there's no changes you can make without causing other problems.
Right.
And then I would say, with the numbers example, I would say, you know, correlation doesn't always
Yeah.
give you causation.
Yes.
So I would be I'd be interested to see what else would be affecting the fact that there's such little overdoses, other than the fact that,
For example, what drugs they're using
yeah.
in particular.
Right.
What drugs do they have access to?
Yeah,
You know, it's
and
a
then
country mostly of marijuana.
and then socioeconomics, and then there's like a ton of stuff that would go into that.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know what would. You know, it's funny because the question kind of leads to what would make society a little bit better,
Right.
And is it like, is legalizing only drugs, is that something that would make society better? And I gotta say I don't think so. I think like there's a major missing key of like educating, you know, like I don't see a world where people are just doing heroin and cocaine and smoking weed and all this stuff, and it's like this
Functional.
beautiful society that everybody. I don't see that. Would it maybe reduce overdoses? Possibly, but if the end goal is to have a good society where people wake up in the morning and they don't have to worry about getting shot in the face or dying or where they're going to get their food, or you know, they can't afford their insurance on their car. If that's the society we're going towards, then I don't think legalizing drugs is what makes it to that end goal. I don't. I think education. I think people having, yeah, and like goals in life. When, you know, like people say that they're bored, and I look around and I go, wow, how the fuck are you bored in this world? There's so many. You drop one thing, you pick something else up. You rock climbing, and then there's woodworking, and there's learning the guitar, and there's learning another language. There's so many things you could do in this short life, other than
Be bored.
yeah, and other than
drugs,
like
yeah.
just spend your time doing drugs. And like, yeah, if you wanted to have a trip a couple times just to like make you more creative. I have a buddy of mine who all through college like didn't put weed down because it made him more artistic, and he painted these beautiful things. I get it. But at the end of the day, if the goal is to have a beautiful society where we're all happy and everybody doesn't have to worry about the bare necessities and depression and getting shot and killed and rape,
Overdosing.
yeah, and overdosing, then no. Then my answer would be no. That's not. It might solve a couple problems. Overdosing might be one of them, but that's not the society I want. That's not where I want to go, where I'm walking down the street and people are smoking crack or doing heroin because we don't want to have a war on drugs or a population in jail. That's not what I want. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. It was,
No problem,
it was
man.
great.
Yeah.
Nice
Pleasure
to
meeting
meet
you guys.
Yeah.